Hello, this is War Crimes Uwu. Welcome back to another pre-release guide. This time, we are taking it down to Thunder Junction, the newest Magic the Gathering set. We're going to be talking about pre-release draft. We're going to be going over the limited archetypes. I'm going to be giving you all the information you need to know to pull off your heist. We're just going to go over this table of contents real quick. Thank you for coming and checking this guide out. I hope you find it helpful. We're going to first talk about new and returning mechanics in the set, including the bonus sheets. Yes, bonus sheets, plural. And then we're going to discuss the best commons and uncommons by color for this limited format. Then we're going to talk about the archetypes, sort of what decks you're going to be kind of expected to build in this format. We're going to go over the best bombs at Rare and Mythic to watch out for in your drafts, and then we're going to go over tips and tricks for the format, just some kind of more scattershot thoughts about what the format is going to look like. So please, if you find this guide helpful, I would love it if you'd like and subscribe, share it with a friend. But without further ado, let's go discussing the new and returning mechanic. Now, this is the only real returning mechanic, and it's deserts. And this is a special land subtype. It's going to behave very similarly to the way that caves behaved in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, where there are a few cards that care about them a little bit. It's kind of a secret deck and draft. And then all of the, or almost all, maybe all of the non-basic lands in the set are deserts. So those will kind of contribute to that limited format. Few things to look here. You've got this nice big green creature, Cacturangula. Costs less if you control a desert. Very nice. You've also got this cycle, or I guess super cycle since it's 10 cards, of deserts that enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, they deal 1 damage to target opponent, and then they tap for 2 different colors. So they're sort of like the opposite of the lifelands that were most recently printed in March of the Machine. That text on there is going to be relevant. Those are going to come up a few more times in this guide, so sort of keep those in the back of your mind. But that's the desert mechanic. Next, we've got a new mechanic, plot. Now, I'm going to read you the rules text for plot. Plot will always come with a cost, and it'll say you may pay the cost and exile this card from your hand. Cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. Plot only as a sorcery. Now, what that's essentially saying is that on anytime you can cast a sorcery, you can pay the plot cost and exile this card face up. You're showing it to your opponent, right, as you're paying the plot cost. But later, you can cast that plotted card for free as a sorcery. So this is going to be often on cards that are like awkward on the curve. So maybe they're a little bit too good to be a 4 drop, not quite good enough to be a 5 drop. In the case of this Djinn of Fool's Fall. Or sometimes it's going to be the case on a card that really requires some setup. So like a card that cares about you casting multiple spells in a turn, or cares about whether a creature died this turn on the black snag buzzard here. And the purpose that plot is going to be playing there is that you can pay for the card in advance, and then just have it ready in the chamber when that condition is met. Whether that's a creature having died this turn, or you having enough creatures to get a lot of value off of something. That card's going to be there later. So it's a really neat mechanic. There's going to be a few limited archetypes that sort of care about plotting, and we'll go over those. But just so you know how plot works, you're paying the cost, showing your opponent the card, exiling it face up, and then later you can cast it for free, all at sorcery speed. We've got another new mechanic, Crimes. Now this one is kind of like Revolt from Aether Revolt, where it's just a simple condition that's going to get met on a lot of turns, and you get a bonus if that condition is met. In the case of Crimes, that condition is targeting opponents, anything they control, and or cards in their graveyards. Finally, a mechanic for EDH players. Targeting anything of your opponents is a crime. Countering their spell is a crime. Targeting their creature with removal is a crime. Targeting something in their graveyard, or you'll remember those deserts that we talked about, the tapped 2-color deserts. Those are a crime because they deal 1 damage to target opponents. So that's a very easy way to enable your crime cards. And as you can see, there's a variety of different payoffs for crimes. This Mana Dork untaps. This creature gets bigger if you've committed a crime this turn. This creature can come back from your graveyard. So all the colors are going to care about crime, some more than others. There's a limited archetype built around it, or really 1.5 limited archetypes built around it that we'll kind of get into shortly. Next, we've got another new mechanic, saddles and mounts. Now, mount is a creature type, and saddle is a mechanic that all of the mounts have. And this is sort of reminiscent of vehicles. Essentially, you can tap creatures. Now, notably, this is only as a sorcery as opposed to crew, which is instant speed. But you can tap your creatures to saddle one of your creatures. So this one has saddle 2, so you have to tap creatures with total power 2 or more to saddle it. And when you attack while it's saddled, it gains first strike and you scry 1. So these creatures basically get a bonus if you're willing to put your other creatures on them. Basically, tap your creatures. They're not going to be doing any combat this turn. They can buff your mounts. And there's a variety of different power levels on these. Usually it's not a huge bonus because asking you just to tap another creature you control is not that big of a cost. Especially worth noting, similar to crew, you can saddle even with summoning sick creatures. So even if you played a creature this turn, it can still saddle one of your creatures. Next we've got Spree. Now this mechanic is fun. This is sort of like a build your own spell sort of mechanic, right? So it's at all rarities in all colors. It's on sorceries and instants. And it has a base cost up in the top right corner, but it doesn't do anything with its base cost. You have to use these additional costs in the text box. So, for example, on this explosive derailment, it's a single red for an instant, +2, explosive derailment deals 4 damage to target creature, or +2, destroy target artifact. So you have sort of a build your own spell. You can get just one of those effects by paying just the base cost and then one of those costs, or you can get both of those effects. Some of the Spree cards are going to have 3 effects, right? So you can kind of pick and choose. It's sort of a spell a la carte. Very interesting design. Makes these cards kind of hard to evaluate in a fun way because there's a lot of different modes they could have, a lot of different roles they could play at different points during the game. So keep an eye out for that. We've got several Spree cards on what are, in my opinion, the best commons and uncommons in each color list. So we'll go over those then. But yeah, keep an eye out. These Spree cards are going to be a lot to read. So, make sure that you kind of familiarize yourself with some of them before you jump into your first draft so you're not overwhelmed. Next, we've got another new mechanic. This is hardly a new mechanic. It's just Outlaws. It's a batch of creature types, and there are cards that are going to care about your Outlaws. So that list of creature types is Assassins, Mercenaries, Pirates, Rogues, and Warlocks. So those 5 creature types count as Outlaws. A good chunk of the set is Outlaws. Many of the creatures are Outlaws, as well as the most prevalent token in the set, which is Mercenary tokens, are also Outlaws. So, it's not going to be something you have to dig for super hard. I will say only a couple colors care about Outlaws. Black-red is the big archetype that's Outlaws. Spoiler. Once we get to the archetypes, we'll kind of talk about that. But while we're here, we might as well discuss mercenary tokens. There are lots of cards in lots of colors that make mercenary tokens, and what they are is just 1/1s that can tap to give target creature you control +1/0 until end of turn, only as a sorcery. So think of them as a little bit better than just a normal 1/1 token, because if you don't currently have any good attacks, but you might have good attacks if you could sort of combine your creatures together a little bit, you can kind of do that. You can give that buff to maybe a creature with some keywords or to your biggest creature so that it's safe to go in and attack. Now we're going to talk about the first of 2 bonus sheets. Yes, there are 2 bonus sheets. This bonus sheet is crimes, and what it essentially is it's done in the style of these newspaper clippings, depicting spells that commit crimes. Now, I've put what I think are the 3 most relevant and sort of immediately powerful uncommon ones here, because these are the ones that I think are going to play the biggest role in Limited. We've got Fierce Retribution, originally in, it's Cleave, so that would have been Crimson Vow. I was trying to remember which of the 2 Innistrad sets. And that one can cleave for 6 and just destroy any target creature, or for 2 it can destroy target attacking creature. And then we've got Skewer the Critics from Ravnica Allegiances, which is, of course, a sorcery speed 3-mana lightning bolt, or you can Spectacle it, so if an opponent lost life this turn, you can cast it for just 1. And then the classic Murder, of course. So there's not as much removal in the main set, and that's because a lot of the removal is on this crimes bonus sheet, right? This bonus sheet is, the theme of it is crime, so all of these cards can target your opponent's things. We're going to talk about a few of the bombs off the sheet later in the presentation, but just be aware there's going to be one of these in every pack, and it's kind of a list of different cards that can commit crimes, that can target your opponent's things. And that's where you're going to be looking for some of your removal. Next, we've got a very, to me at least, a baffling decision. Another bonus sheet called the Big Score. Now, this shares a slot with the special guests, so there are a few special guests, but essentially what happened, I'll try to be brief, is that there was going to be another Aftermath-style epilogue booster after the set, but Aftermath sold so poorly that they scrapped that at, it's unclear what stage of design it was in exactly when they scrapped it, but they took, I guess, the most important mythic rares, which there are a lot of them on this bonus sheet. They took, I guess, the most important mythic rares and just repurposed them for this. But the way that it works, you'll essentially get a big scorecard replacing a common in 1 in 5 boosters, which means that they are slightly more common than a mythic rare, replacing your rare in your pack. But it's worth noting that because the list of big score mythics is larger, an individual big score mythic, a particular one, is slightly more rare than a particular mythic from the main set. It was said by, I believe, Mark Gottlieb in a stream that by the time you have opened 10 copies of a specific main set mythic, you will have opened 8 copies of a specific big score mythic. So, kind of keep that in mind. But all in all, these are kind of splashy, powerful cards. Some of them feel like they could have been rares or mythics in the set, and kind of makes me question why they decided to compress this into an extra bonus sheet in an already quite complicated set, rather than choosing to, scrap it, put their favorite ideas in the set, and then save the other ones for later. But whatever, there's obviously a lot of pressure on them. They're releasing a lot of products, whatever. Point is, these will be in about 1 in 5 packs, and it's basically just an extra mythic or rare. Some of them are powerful, some of them are not exactly, and we'll kind of discuss that. Obviously, the 3 that I have here, Lotus Ring, Hostile Investigator, and Ultec Matter Weaver, are all very solid cards. You'd be happy to have one of them in your deck. Solid rares. But I just wanted to get you prepared for what the big score is, right? On average, you'll get 1 in a pre-release kit, although you're not guaranteed to. And on average, you'll see 1 in a little bit more often than every other draft. All right, so we're going to be talking about next the best commons and uncommons in the set in each color. These are your bread and butter cards. These are what's going to be making up the majority of your limited decks, although obviously we're now in the era of play boosters, so uncommons are slightly more common, commons are slightly less common than before, but these are still going to be making up the large majority of your limited decks, so they're the cards that it's most important for you to familiarize yourself with. Starting as we always do with white, first we're going to talk about Holy Cow, 2 and a white for a 2/2 Ox Angel with flash and flying. When Holy Cow enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and scry 1. Immediately, those who played Streets of New Capenna Limited, your mind's going to jump to Inspiring Overseer. 3 mana, 2/1 flyer. When it enters, you gain a life and draw a card. Now, gain 2 life and scry 1 is obviously not as good as gain a life and draw a card, right? But it's not that much worse, and the flash and the extra 1 toughness are very real on this thing. Being able to put it in on your opponent's end step, scry, make sure you like your top deck, and then you have a flyer that's ready to swing that they weren't prepared for, is a lot. I think Holy Cow is definitely the best common white creature in the set. I don't think that's particularly controversial. I think most people would probably agree with me on that. Now we've got Ariet's Lullaby, 1 and a white for a sorcery. Destroy target tapped creature, you gain 2 life. Now they've talked a lot about wanting to sort of fix the play-draw disparity, make limited formats a little less aggro. It's a problem that they're kind of aware of. And this says to me, that they really are working on that. This is a very powerful card against aggro decks because aggro decks don't really want it, right? You don't want to destroy tapped creatures if you're on the beatdown. You want to make it so your opponent doesn't want to attack you, right? You're trying to get through their blockers. And the gaining 2 life is very helpful for that as well. And then we've got Bridled Bighorn, 3 and a white for a 3/4 sheep mount with vigilance. Whenever it attacks while saddled, you get a 1/1 white sheep creature token, and you can saddle 2, so you can tap 2 power worth of creatures to saddle it, and then when it swings, you get a 1/1. Obviously, you're going to have to be able to safely swing with a 3/4, which you can do on plenty of boards, and if you do, you're leaving behind a 1/1. Those 1/1s can eventually be used to saddle the Bridled Bighorn, so, it's not often that a common, technically has ways to keep spitting out 1/1s, so that's very cool. Next, we're going to go into the white uncommons, and here we've got a spree card, Getaway Glamour. Now, I'm usually pretty good at pronouncing words. I've seen this word on a few Magic cards, and I actually am not sure if it's glamour. I know glimmer, and I know gleam, so I don't know. It seems like it's only used in the context of that glimmer would be used in. But anyhow, it's a single white for an instant at uncommon. Spree. For 1 additional mana, exile target non-token creature. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And for an additional 2 mana, destroy target creature if no other creature has greater power. So, essentially, if your opponent controls the biggest creature, you can remove it for 3 mana at instant speed, which is pretty good. And then you get the bonus of potentially blinking a creature, or rather flickering a creature. So where this is going to be the best is if you have 4 mana, your opponent has a big thing, they go to remove your thing, you blink it to protect your thing and remove their thing in response. That's an absolute blowout. That's a 2-for-1 for only 4 mana. That's affecting the board. Very good. But even just seeing this as a removal spell, perfectly fine. Next, we've got Frontier Seeker, 1 and a white for a 2/1 human scout. When Frontier Seeker enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a mount creature card or a plains card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, a plains off the top 5 in a 2-color deck you might sometimes whiff, but plenty of the decent creatures in this set are mounts. If you're getting a mount off of this, you're going to feel great. If you're getting a plains off of this, you're going to feel pretty good too. It's a 2-mana 2/1 that replaces itself and then presumably trades. Who doesn't love that? And then next we've got Thunder Lasso. This is 2 and a white for an uncommon equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls. So this kind of reminds me of Bola Slinger from March of the Machine, that cat with backup. And I mean, it's cheaper, it doesn't make the body, but it can keep getting moved around after the creature dies. It seems like a very powerful tool for aggressive decks, a very good way to kind of deal with what your opponent might want to have as blockers. So I think this card is a lot better than it reads. So those are, in my opinion, the best white uncommons. We're going to move on to the next blue commons. We're going to start with Stop Cold, which is very close to Tamiyo's Completion from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. It's 3 and a blue for an aura with flash, enchant artifact or creature. When Stop Cold enters the battlefield, tap enchanted permanent. Enchanted permanent loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So, the closest thing that blue is going to get to a straight-up removal spell. You're taking something out of commission. You can do it right before combat on their turn, which is, makes it a little more versatile. Just a good blue removal spell. Then we've got Harrier Strix. 1 mana, 1/1 bird with flying. When Harrier Strix enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. So remember, you target your opponent's things. That's a crime. That's cool. And then for 3 and a blue, you can draw a card and discard a card. So late game, this thing is a mana sink that's going to just fix your mana. Or it's going to just sort of fix your draws, rather, and kind of make sure that you're filtering out the cards that you don't want later in the game, which is really powerful. And then we've got Razzle Dazzler. Now this sort of gives us a hint to what one of the themes of the set is going to be, one of the archetypes. He's 1 and a blue for a 1/2 human wizard. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Razzle Dazzler. It can't be blocked this turn. Now, if you'll recall that plot mechanic, that's going to make it easier to proc things like this, where you've plotted something in a previous turn, so it's free, so you really only need to be actually casting 1 spell from your hand in order to proc things like this. So keep that in mind. Now we're going to talk about the best blue uncommons. Slick Shot Lockpicker is a 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human rogue. So 3 mana, 2/3 human rogue. When it enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So, right now where it's reminding us of Snapcaster Mage, former multi-format all-star, kind of washed up now. But it's also got plot for 2 and a blue, and that line is really important. Because if you just plot this on turn 3, for the rest of the game, you have the ability to leave up, a free 2/3 and flashback a spell from your graveyard, right? So, this is going to give you an extra use of a removal spell, and even if you can't afford to actually cast this and cast the removal spell in the same turn, you can plot this and just leave that option up for later. So I think Slick Shot Lockpicker is a very, very powerful uncommon. And then we've got Nimble Brigand, 3 mana, 1/3 human rogue here, 2 and a blue. Can't be blocked if you've committed a crime this turn. Whenever Nimble Brigand deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So not only can you make this, even if you can't commit a crime, you can make this a little more of a tough thing to block by using your mercenary tokens to buff it. Things like that. It's relatively easy to commit a crime in this set, and if you can commit a crime, he's guaranteed to draw you a card. So this card is pretty good. And then we've got Plan the Heist. 2 and double blue for an uncommon sorcery. Surveil 3 if you have no cards in hand. Then draw 3 cards. And then you can plot this for 3 and a blue. So the big thing here being, it's 3 cards for 4 mana, which is a good rate, right? That's literally just... Harmonize. What's the blue one? Concentration. That's literally just concentration. But if you plot it beforehand so that you can kind of plan to empty out your hand, then you get to Surveil 3. You're guaranteed to hit some real action if you're surveilling 3 and drawing 3 cards. That's so many cards deep. So this is just a really good draw card to have access to in a draft. Now we're going to talk about the best black commons. We're going to start with Desperate Bloodseeker. It's a 2 mana, 2/2 lifelink vampire. When Desperate Bloodseeker enters the battlefield, target player mills 2 cards. Now the reason this is on here is because it really ties together several of the different themes in the set. You've got a green-black deck that really cares about the graveyard, so you can target yourself with this to put those things in the graveyard. But it's also just, a 2 mana, 2/2 with a keyword that commits a crime when it comes in. So you've got things that care about crimes. This is gonna fulfill that condition for you by targeting your opponent to mill the 2 cards. And then we've got Consuming Ashes. So this is 2 and double black for an instant at common. I think this is going to be the go-to black removal for the set. Exile target creature. If it had mana value 3 or less, Surveil 2. So what this is doing for you is providing you an exile spell, and if you had to use it on something small just because your opponent was aggroing you down or something, you get to Surveil 2. And, having that at instant speed lets you kind of get the drop on what your draw is going to be next turn, and that's very important. And then for the last... powerful black common, we've got Vault Plunderer, 2 and a black for a human rogue, 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, target player draws a card and loses a life. Now, I guess you could potentially finish your opponent off with this if they're at 1, or if you really need to commit a crime, although you're giving them a card, so that crime payoff better be pretty strong. But what you're usually going to do with this is draw a card yourself, and so I would compare it to Blade Juggler from Ravnica Allegiance, where that card was a 3/2, and you could spectacle it for 2 and a black, and you drew a card and lost a life when it came in. This is kind of similar to that. It's doing its job in terms of trading by being a 3/1 for 3, but it's also replacing itself with a card. So this card's just a very good black common to have. It's also a rogue, for those decks that care about Outlaws. Looking at the best black uncommons, now a lot of the removals on the bonus sheet, so normally there's an uncommon black removal spell that's really efficient that I put here, but I honestly couldn't find one that I really liked, so you're going to that just kind of goes to show how much of your removal is coming from that crimes bonus sheet. But we've got, in any case, Rictus Robber here, 3 and a black for a 4/3 zombie rogue. When Rictus Robber enters the battlefield, if a creature died this turn, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token, which, okay, morbid, not too hard to line that up, but here we've got plot for 2 and a black. which means you can pay for this on turn 3, and then you can just choose not to cast it until something has died this turn, until you can fulfill that morbid trigger. So a lot of flexibility on this card makes it very easy to ensure that you're getting that full value and you're getting that 2/2. And then we've got Forsaken Miner, single black for a 2/2 skeleton rogue that can't block, but whenever you commit a crime, you may pay a black. If you do, return Forsaken Miner from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, this is a very powerful card. What it's essentially allowing you to do is just keep bringing back this 2/2 that can't block by just committing crimes. Not a hard thing to do. You do have to have that mana, but, it's not a big ask. I think this card is pretty strong, especially in a very aggressive, crime-oriented deck. And then we've got Blood Hustler. 1 and a black for a 1/1 vampire rogue. Whenever you commit a crime, put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Hustler. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then for 3 and a black, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So not only is this type of mana sink just relatively useful to have in Limited, this is a way to consistently, repeatedly commit crimes, and as an added bonus, whenever you do, this creature gets bigger. So, this is going to feel like a pretty okay way to spend your mana, whether you're out of cards or even if you just want to avoid overextending and you're already ahead, then that's going to be a very useful way to spend your mana. So, Blood Hustler, very powerful black, uncommon. We're going to move on to the best red commons, and we're going to start with Prickly Pear. 2 and a red for a 2/2 plant mercenary. Now, this is our first example of these cactus folk, which are some of the cool new creatures native to Thunder Junction. Now, this is a 3 mana 2/2 plant mercenary. When Prickly Pear enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So 3 mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1 tends to feel good. You're thinking of Preening Champion, where the 2/2 was a flyer in March of the Machine. That's the first thing that sort of comes to mind. Now these mercenary tokens, the mercenary token can buff the Prickly Pear and make it able to attack as a 3/2. And I just think there's a lot of versatility in that, right? It's a lot better than just a normal 1/1. Thinking back also to the new Capenna red common that was a 2/1 that could either make a citizen or a treasure when it came in. This is definitely better than that because you were often, with that card, choosing to make the citizen. And here it's, 1 more toughness on the actual body, and the little 1/1 can contribute to combat in a lot more meaningful way with that tap ability. Next, we've got Discerning Peddler. This is a 2 mana 2/2 human rogue, 1 and a red. When Discerning Peddler enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Now, Scrapwork Mutt was one of the best commons in Brothers War, right? This is kind of harkening back to that. And obviously this doesn't have Unearth, and it is red in the main mana cost rather than colorless. But I think this is just one of the best red 2-drops you can have. Lets you kind of filter, draw something really powerful, potentially sort of get rid of an extra land if you don't need it. Having things like this to shape your draws is just really helpful. And the next we've got Explosive Derailment. Really cool Leon Tucker art on this one. Shout out to him. So it's a single red for the base cost, but it's an instant with Spree. So for 2 more mana, you can deal 4 damage to target creature, and for 2 more mana, you can destroy target artifact. Now, 90% of the time, you're just going to be paying 3 mana for 4 damage at instant speed. That's a great rate. Can't complain. But, sometimes your opponent is going to have an artifact lying around. A lot of the powerful cards from the Big Score bonus sheet happen to be artifacts. So, that extra mode is really helpful to just have tacked on a piece of removal that's already at a rate you're very comfortable with. So when you're going to get a 2-for-1 off of this, it's going to feel great. But, you're just judging it based on paying the first cost, and it definitely passes the bar at that rate. Next, we're going to talk about the best red uncommons. We're going to start with Scorching Shot. We get kind of a sneak peek into how long their turnaround is for design, because I imagine as soon as they realized how good Shieldred was, this card got put into a file. It is double red for a sorcery. Scorching Shot deals 5 damage to target creature. Red decks had trouble dealing with Shieldred in constructed formats, so, this is something, or mono red decks did at least, so this is something that got dropped in for that, I feel like. But in the context of limited, a sorcery for double red, deal 5 damage to target creature. Very good removal. Very good removal. Remains to be seen how many threats in this set demand that kind of removal, as compared to decks that are going to be trying to go wide, where this is, not exactly the piece of removal you'd want against them. But this card's very, very good. Just a very good rate. And then we've got Cunning Coyote. 1 in a red for a 2/2 Coyote with haste. When Cunning Coyote enters the battlefield, another target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. Now, even just with that rate, this is a very solid card. But it's also got plot for 1 in a red. So if you don't want to actually play this on turn 2, if you want to save this for a really explosive turn where you maybe play a big guy and give that haste, you are able to do that. So a very versatile, aggressive card. And then we've got Longhorn Sharpshooter. 2 in a red for a 3/3 Minotaur Rogue with reach. When Longhorn Sharpshooter becomes plotted, it deals 2 damage to any target, and you can plot it for 3 in a red. So essentially what this is doing is it's giving you some versatility. It's almost like an adventure where, the adventure is a 4-mana shock, sorcery speed, and then the creature is a free 3/3 reach, or you can just play it as the 3/3 reach. So, the modality of this card is what's allowing it a lot of its power. I think that's a recurring theme in this set, is that so many of the cards give you a lot of options, right? You've got the spree mechanic, you've got these plot cards that let you decide, pay for it now, cast it when it's most relevant. So just that modality is going to kind of be a recurring theme, that flexibility. So next we're going to talk, lastly, about the best green commons before we move into the archetypes. We're going to talk about the best green commons and uncommons. So Cactarantula, 4 and double green for a 6/5 plant spider. Costs 1 less to cast if you control a desert, so it's a 5-mana 6/5 if you control a desert. It's got reach. Whenever Cactarantula becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. I don't think it's going to be particularly hard to control a desert. Those tapped lands that target an opponent, those go in the land slot. So, it's going to be looking roughly similar to March of the Machine in terms of how often those appear, because the land slot's not always going to be a basic. It's often going to be one of those. So I don't think it's going to be too hard to control a desert, and if you control a desert, this is great. It's 5-mana 6/5, that when your opponent targets it, you get to draw a card, so it replaces itself if it gets answered by removal. Although I also don't feel bad paying 6 mana for this, if I can't jump through that desert hoop. Next we've got Hard Bristle Bandit, and this is a 2-mana plant rogue. It's a 1/1. Taps to add a mana of any color. Whenever you commit a crime, untap Hard Bristle Bandit. This ability triggers only once each turn, so you can kind of plan out a turn. But it's just a mana dork. And I think this card is kind of emblematic of how easy it's going to be to splash in this format. We're already kind of looking at a format similar to March of the Machine in terms of splashability, right? They're kind of encouraging you to. There's actually 2 uncommons of each color pair in this set, as we'll get into later. That give you more of an incentive to play multiple colors. The fixing is very generous. There's those tapped deserts that tap for 2 colors. It's just not going to be super hard to splash. So Hard Bristle Bandit is kind of cluing you in on that as well. And then we've got Free Strider Commando. 2 and a green for a Centaur Mercenary. It's 3/3, right? So you can just have the 3-mana 3/3, or it has plot for 3 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it if it wasn't cast or if no mana was spent to cast it. So the big thing here is plotting it on turn 4 and then getting it on turn 5 as a 5/5, all right, with those 2 counters because you didn't spend any mana when you cast it. So, another sort of flexible card, right? You can just have the 3-mana 3/3, or you can pay 4 mana, get a 5/5 on the next turn. And then we've got the best green uncommons, and we're going to start with Spinewood's Armadillo. 6 and double green for an armadillo with reach and ward 3. It's a 7/7. And you can pay 1 and a green and discard it to search your library for basic land or desert, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. You gain 3 life. So that ability to search for a land or a desert is already pretty powerful. If you're just splashing, this is going to let you splash, find that third color a lot easier. But if you're casting this, it feels great. A 6-mana 7/7 reach ward 3 is a crazy body. Crazy body. So yeah, this card is just going to be, I think, one of the best green uncommons. Just a huge creature. Also really cute art. Shout out to Iris Compier. I'm sorry if I got that last name incorrect, but this art is wonderful. And then we've got Aloe Alchemist, another one of those cactus folk. So he's 1 and a green for a 3/2 plant warlock with trample. When Aloe Alchemist becomes plotted, target creature gets +3/+2 and gains trample until end of turn, and you can plot him for 1 and a green. So you can just have that 2 mana 3/2 trample body, right? That feels pretty good. We've seen that on some uncommons in recent sets. But you can also buff one of your other creatures by plotting this guy. You can essentially get that power and toughness immediately on the board on maybe a creature with flying or lifelink or some relevant keyword to get in there, and then get this guy for free on the following turn. So essentially, in a way, you're giving his stats haste, but then not having access to them on the following turn because he has summoning sickness. So a lot of flexibility there on an above rate body. And then we've got Betrayal at the Vault. So 4 and double green for an instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each of 2 other target creatures. So the danger in this being, obviously you've got to line it up, right? You cannot safely do this when your opponent has mana up because the potential for the blowout where they kill your creature in response is pretty rough, having spent 6 mana on this. But if you have a Death Touch creature or a big enough creature that you can use this and you can kill 2 of your opponent's creatures, that's going to feel amazing as an instant at uncommon for 6 mana. Next, we're going to start talking about the limited archetypes. And in this slideshow, I've included just some cards that contribute to the archetype. I'm going to read out the signpost uncommons, and then I'm going to just leave these up and maybe reference them as they are relevant. But the green-white archetype is saddle/mounts. So each archetype has 2 signpost uncommons in this set. One just general signpost uncommon, and then one that is specifically an uncommon legendary creature. So we'll kind of keep that in mind as we go. So the regular uncommon for the green-white deck is Congregation Gryph. 1 a green and a white for a 1/4 Hippogriff mount with flying and lifelink. So decent stats already. Whenever Congregation Gryph attacks while saddled, it gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of mounts you control. So obviously it's going to count itself. And then it has Saddle 3. So the more mounts you have, the bigger this thing is going to get when it attacks while saddled. And it's Flying Lifelink is a great pair of keywords to put more stats on. So that's obviously something to keep in mind. And then there's just going to be a lot of mounts in these colors, so it's not going to be too hard to fill a deck with those. Here we show Giant Beaver and Trained Airynx, which are 2 common mounts you might be able to draft. Then as we go into the uncommons, we've got Miriam Herd Whisperer, which is a green and a white for a 3/2 human druid, legendary. As long as it's your turn, mounts and vehicles you control have hexproof, so they can't 2-for-1 you for the turn by having you saddle a creature and then they kill it in response, which is really nice. And then whenever a mount or vehicle you control attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you're getting some permanent stats on your mounts, and of course also vehicles, although the limited archetype is not really focused on vehicles. I am assuming they included that line to make her a little bit more relevant in like constructed, maybe casual command or something like that. But essentially, although there are a couple of vehicles in the set, mounts are the main focus. We've got this Mana Dork that's a 2 mana 2/2 with reach that can tap for 2 mana of any one color on mount or vehicle spells. Very powerful. And we've got the Shepherd of the Clouds, which can reanimate permanent cards that cost 3 or less if you control a mount. So, two relatively powerful cards. But essentially what this deck is going to be trying to do is use other small creatures to crew your mounts to gain advantages, to sort of generate value and make big attacks. And that's what green-white is trying to do in this limited format. This is, I think, going to be one of the archetypes that lives and dies by its synergy the most, because it is very much sort of A-B. Like, do you have a mount and do you have a thing that pays you off for mounts? So this deck looks like it's really going to have to come together. Honestly, I don't have a ton of faith in this deck. It's sort of reminding me of the Samurai deck in Kamigo and Neon Dynasty, where it feels like it was cool in theory, but it didn't necessarily always come together. And that's, I guess, the warning that I would give. Although it's important to note that, like, mounts can saddle each other, but then you're obviously, not getting the full value out of the mount that's doing the saddling. Next, we've got white-blue, and this archetype looks really fun. It's not casting spells from your hand in the turn. So it's sort of asking you to build a deck where you can take turns of yours where you're not casting any spells from your hand. And the two main ways to do that are spending your turn plotting and casting plot cards, or using cards with flash and instants, so that you don't have to do anything on your turn, but you can do things on your opponent's turn. So to sort of explain that, we've got Wrangler of the Damned first. Now this is a 5-mana 1/4 human soldier with flash. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, create a 2/2 white spirit creature token with flying. So you can kind of plan this out where you flash it in on your opponent's end step on a turn where you're planning to maybe just plot cards and then cast plot cards. And then get your 2/2. And this thing having flash means that you can spend your turn 5 triggering your other cards that care about not casting a spell from your hand that turn by not casting this on your turn and just waiting for your opponent's turn to flash it in. So definitely a very, very interesting signpost uncommon. 5 mana is a lot, but I really do think this card can put in some work. And then we've got Inventive Wingsmith. Of course, gets a flying counter in your end step if you didn't cast a spell from your hand. And Daring Thunder Thief, which is a blue creature with flash that will allow you to sort of, pass your turn, trigger your things that care about not casting spells on your turn, and then still getting that body for your mana. And then the legendary creature signpost uncommon is Gem Lightfoot Sky Explorer. 4 mana 3/3 human scout with flying and vigilance. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, draw a card. So Gem Lightfoot is obviously, sort of a slightly smaller Sarah Angel. Nothing wrong with that body in Limited. Those stats are okay. Those keywords are okay in 2024. But the fact that, maybe on the turn after you cast this, you just plot a couple things, or you cast some things off plot, or you cast something off as an instant on your opponent's turn, you're going to get to draw a card. That's huge. Prairie Dog here as well, a lifelink creature that keeps getting bigger under those conditions. Very powerful. Emergent Haunting is a 2-mana enchantment that becomes a 3/3 flyer permanently if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn. So, that's very powerful. And then it has a mana sync ability where you can surveil. So this is sort of, I think this deck is going to be really cool. This is definitely the deck that I'm the most excited to play. Because I think it'll be a really fun sort of, evaluating, like, I have to cast this card as a sorcery, or I can't plot this card. Is it powerful enough to be worth putting in my deck despite that? How hard am I going to go into these synergies versus just having a mid-range deck? So this deck seems really sweet. It's going to make you think about the cards that you're drafting in a different way. How much do I value plot? How much do I value the ability to cast things on my opponent's turn? I think that the white-blue deck in this format is definitely going to be that. So this has my pick for, like, most unique archetype, one that I'm the most excited to play with. We'll see how good it is, though. Next, we've got blue-black crimes. So we're going to start with the normal signpost uncommon, which is Intimidation Campaign, which is an enchantment for 1, a blue and a black. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, and you draw a card. Whenever you commit a crime, you may return Intimidation Campaign to its owner's hand. So this is sort of a recurrent, drain, draw a card, that you can have it keep coming back by committing crimes, which again, like those deserts, are a common way to commit a crime, removal spells, counter spells, stuff like that. And I think, you could get a deck going with this. I don't love the rate on this. I'm comparing it to, say, like Disinformation Campaign from Guilds of Ravnica, where, like, that discarded a card from your opponent's hand and you drew a card, and you got it back whenever you surveilled. You could definitely build around that card. I feel like this card is not giving quite as much and is asking probably roughly the same of you. So I don't think this card's great. I think you have to be really in on the theme to want it, but it does replace itself, so there's, a ceiling on how bad a card that replaces itself can be. But that's the regular signpost uncommon. The legendary signpost uncommon is Lazav, Familiar Stranger. Now, we've gotten a lot of Lazav cards in recent years. Just the last set had a Lazav in it. But what he does is essentially he's 1 blue and a black for a 1/4 legendary shapeshifter. Whenever you commit a crime, put a +1/+1 counter on Lazav, Familiar Stranger. Then you may exile a card from a graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, you may have Lazav become a copy of that card until end of turn. This ability triggers only once per turn. So, the big thing here being just, commit a crime, he gets a counter, and then if there's like maybe a flyer in the graveyard or something, you can have him become a copy of that until end of turn and get a big hit in. Relatively versatile card. And then, Blood Hustler is here again, just that very powerful black uncommon. And we've got Marauding Sphinx as well, 5-mana, 3/5. Flying Vigilance, Ward 2. Whenever you commit a crime, Surveil 2. This ability triggers only once each turn. Perfectly serviceable card, good body. The blue-black crimes deck, it doesn't feel like you're going to be going super hard in on the theme, which is why I think Disinformation Campaign, or it's not Disinformation Campaign, but the enchantment we just talked about, that card is like not going to be as strong as I think just building kind of a semi-controlling deck that's just, sort of a blue-black mid-range deck is going to be the shape that this takes more often than a dedicated crimes deck. And then we've got Black-Red Outlaws. Now, this deck also kind of cares about crimes. That's why I said earlier there's sort of 1.5 limited archetypes that care about crimes. But we've got these cards that just are sort of encouraging you for playing Outlaws, giving bonuses to your Outlaws. And again, to remind you, that list of creature types that comprise Outlaws is Assassins, Mercenaries, Pirates, Rogues, and Warlocks. So we're going to start with At Knife Point, which is an enchantment. As long as it's your turn, Outlaws you control have first strike. It's 1 black and a red, sorry, for the enchantment. As long as it's your turn, Outlaws you control have first strike. Whenever you commit a crime, you make a mercenary token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So those mercenary tokens being the 1/1s that at sorcery speed can tap to pump one of your creatures. This signpost uncommon does not seem good. The first strike on your turn is obviously really good for an aggro deck, but you want that, if you're an aggro deck, you want that on a body. You don't want to be spending turn 3 to play this enchantment that kind of ekes out value by committing crimes. I don't love this signpost uncommon. But it does seem like, enough of the creatures in red and black especially just happen to be Outlaws that any of your cards that synergize with Outlaws are going to be very easy to have proc here. And then we've got the signpost uncommon legendary creature, Vile Smasher Gleeful Grenadier. So he's 2 mana, he's a black and a red for a 3/2 legendary Goblin Mercenary. Whenever another outlaw enters the battlefield under your control, Vile Smasher Gleeful Grenadier deals 1 damage to target opponent. So, 2 mana, 3/2, that's going to be pinging your opponent off of other outlaws coming in. Again, that procs off of your mercenary tokens, which is very relevant. If you're very aggressive, curving this into Prickly Pear is going to feel pretty good because you've got your 3/2 ready to attack, and then you've also hit your opponent for 2 and gotten those 2 creatures on turn 3. So, very relevant. And also must be pointed out that it is target opponent. So every time an outlaw comes in under your control, you are committing a crime if Vile Smasher's out there. So then we've got Rakish Crew, 3 mana enchantment. When it comes in, you get a mercenary. Whenever an outlaw you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So you've got this sort of Blood Artist effect. This is kind of like Bastion of Remembrance from Ikoria, right? You've just got to make sure that all your creatures or most of your creatures at least, are outlaws. And then Hellspur Brute, 5 mana, 5/4 trample, affinity for outlaws, right? You can get this down to a ridiculous rate, and that feels pretty good. And then last of the ally color pairs before we move on to the enemy ones, we've got red-green Ferocious, which it's not an ability word, but anymore. But back when it debuted in Cons of Tarkir, it was called Ferocious. Essentially, a deck that cares about whether you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So we've got Cactus Folk Sure Shot, which is 2 a red and a green for a 4/4 plant mercenary with reach. Ward 2. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, other creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain trample and haste until end of turn. So just decent body. 4 mana, 4/4 reach, ward 2 is nothing to scoff at. And it's also giving your other large creatures access to haste and trample. So, very good for kind of closing out a game. Bristlepack Sentry is worth noting because it's very similar to the Wolf from Wilds of Eldraine, except, it's got Defender, but it's a 2 mana 3/3. As long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Bristlepack Sentry can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So the important thing here being that it's basically a strictly better version of that wolf because it has the power regardless of whether you have that creature with power 4 or greater. So it blocks as a 3/3 as well. So just a great creature to have while you're holding down the early game, holding down against an aggro deck in the early game before you can kind of pop off with your 4 or greater power game plan. And next we're going to move to the legendary signpost uncommon, Jolene Plundering Pugilist. In the background, we've got a snake horse. There's one other rare in the set that depicts these snorses. I love them. I think they're wonderful. I think it's kind of crazy that they didn't get more of a focus. These snake horses are so cool. I think they're dope. But anyway, Jolene Plundering Pugilist. 1 a red and a green for a 4/2 legendary human mercenary. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures with power 4 or greater, create a treasure token. And you can pay 1 and a red, sacrifice a treasure token. Jolene Plundering Pugilist deals 1 damage to any target. So a few things here. Obviously, she triggers on herself. So when she attacks, you get a treasure token. And then you can use those treasure tokens to get guaranteed crimes off of her, right? You can pay 2, sack the treasure, deal 1 to your opponent's dome. That's a crime. Get rid of one of their mercenary tokens, and that's a crime. But yeah, this card just seems decent. Just a 3 mana 4/2 that makes a treasure whenever it attacks. Passes the sniff test. So, Jolene Plundering Pugilist, definitely fine. Scalestorm Summoner, 3 mana 3/3. Whenever it attacks, you get a 3/1 if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So, not only just if you can buff this with a mercenary, it's going to be making a 3/1 every time it attacks, which is kind of crazy. It's just not going to be that hard to trigger. And getting a free 3/1 off of your 3 mana 3/3 is crazy. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. And then we've got Beast Bond Outcaster. 2 and a green for a 3/3 human druid. When Beast Bond Outcaster enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. And then this guy has plot for 1 and a green. So not only are you able to, plot this on turn 2 and then just cast it on turn 3 if you just want the 3/3, you can plot it on turn 2 and then put it in only when you can trigger its ability. So, you have a lot of versatility, a lot of I have 2 mana laying around right now. I'll be able to get a 3/3 and draw a card later in the game for free, which is, nothing to scoff at. And then we're going to talk about the enemy color pair archetypes. So we'll start with white-black tokens / sacrifice. This is a common theme for white-black to embody in limited formats. Ruthless Lawbringer is the regular signpost uncommon. It's 1 a white and a black for a 3/2 vampire assassin. When Ruthless Lawbringer enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target non-land permanent. So, 3 mana 3/2, sack a mercenary token or something, and blow up a non-land permanent. It's very versatile removal on a 3/2 body. Feels great. No notes. Vengeful Townsfolk is sort of, we've seen this before. It's often 3 mana 2/2. This time it's a 3 mana 3/3. Human Citizen. Whenever 1 or more other creatures you control die, put a +1/+1 counter on Vengeful Townsfolk. So it gets bigger when your things die. Although it's worth noting if multiple things die in combat at the same time, you still only get 1 counter on this. But, it's entering at rate. It's entering as a 3 mana 3/3, which makes it feel a lot less bad to play than the other townsfolk we've seen that are 3 mana 2/2s that get a counter whenever one of your things dies. I think it's a worthy trade to have it say 1 or more, but come in as a 3/3. And then Boneyard Desecrator, menace creature that can get bigger that by sacrificing other creatures, so it's kind of an outlet for sacking. And then we've got the legendary uncommon, signpost uncommon, Baron Bertram Greywater. 2 a white and a black for a 3/4 legendary Vampire Noble. Whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 black Vampire Rogue creature token with lifelink. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then for 1 and a black, sacrifice another creature or artifact, draw a card. So, the big thing you're going to be doing off of this most often is you're going to be having, mercenaries come in. That's going to trigger this, give you those Vampire Rogues with lifelink. You have ways to make treasure tokens, potentially. There's a lot of things you can do in white and black that can generate a little small token, and then he gives you an extra one. I don't love how little he does by himself. Right? If you don't have a way to make a token after he's already out, then he's kind of just sitting there as a 3/4, 2 mana, sack something, draw a card is not a great rate unless you've already got some mercenaries sitting around that you don't necessarily care too much about. But, maybe just the amount of text on this, the amount of situational relevance on this will propel it to be better than what it appears to be. But I think the white-black deck will also be less dedicated to actually going in on its theme of tokens and sacrificing, and similar to the blue-black deck, just be more of a general mid-range deck. General mid-range strategy that cares about tokens and sacking to a degree. Next, we're going to talk about Black-Green Graveyard. This one is not spelled out super strongly. Doesn't ask you to be very into it in the way that, maybe the exile creatures from graveyards or the creatures leaving graveyards theme from Murder's at Karlov Manor was. We're starting with this first signpost uncommon, Badlands Revival. 3 a black and a green for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Return up to 1 target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. This card's insane. Reanimator spell for 5 mana, but also you get to just get a permanent spell back. Insane value. Still giving you that sort of... still giving you some board presence as well. Very powerful card. Yeah, green and black is going to be all about, milling yourself to an extent, but mostly just getting things naturally into the graveyard and getting them back. Speaking of insane signpost uncommons, the legendary signpost uncommon is perhaps even more insane. Honest Rutstein. 1 a black and a green for a 3/2 legendary human warlock. When Honest Rutstein enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I'm going to compare this to Eternal Witness, which in most limited formats I would be ecstatic to have an Eternal Witness, or I'd at least feel very fine with it. This guy's 1/1 bigger. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and the trade-off is you have to return a creature card. Now, I would say if you have an Eternal Witness in limited, it's often going to be getting back a removal spell, but I would say most of the time it's going to be getting back a creature. So, losing that versatility is unfortunate, but it's not like it's restricting you to a card type that isn't most of your deck. And for a creature that's on rate and then, lets you cast bigger creatures for cheaper, this card's insane. It's an insane... I think it's probably the best signpost uncommon in the set, and I feel pretty comfortable saying that. Honest Rutstein is very good. We got Hollow Marauder, a flyer that gets cheaper for each creature in your graveyard, and when it comes in, any number of target opponents discard a card, and if they didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card. So, a great flyer, and you discard a card, and if you can't, I draw a card. Late in the game. Rise of the Varmints is a plot card, but you get 2/1s equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So you can plot it early for 3 mana, and then cast it when you feel like you'd be getting a good amount of Varmints off of it. So the green-black graveyard deck seems very open to sort of just playing a mid-range strategy that takes care to put decent creatures in the graveyard and kind of generates an unstoppable amount of value and size of bodies into the late game. And that's its plan for winning. Nothing wrong with that. We've seen that in plenty of limited formats, and it's been fine. Next, we've got green-blue plot ramp. This one's kind of hard to figure out and kind of hard to evaluate cards for, which I think is cool. So we're starting with the signpost uncommon, Make Your Own Luck. 3 a green and a blue for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may exile a non-land card from among them. If you do, it becomes plotted. Put the rest into your hand. So, you're basically you're drawing 3 cards as a sorcery, but you're getting one of them for free, although you can only cast it the next turn. And of course, the card doesn't necessarily have to organically have plot. You can plot a card that doesn't say plot on it if you have an effect that tells you to, like make your own luck. I think this card's probably fine. It's a lot of mana, but you could be getting something. Obviously the jackpot with this is you get something that costs more than 5 mana, and then you're basically drawing the 2 cards for free, and then you're casting the spell next turn, which is when you would have cast it anyway, and that's obviously really powerful. But that's not going to happen every time. Sometimes you're going to get 2 lands and a 2-drop, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll cast this 2-drop for free next turn. That doesn't feel great, but yeah, I think Make Your Own Luck is very solid. We've got this thing that makes a creature based on the greatest power among creatures you control, and you can plot it to wait to cast it until you have a big creature. Obviously, very very powerful here. And then just a flyer with plot. And then this other uncommon, the uncommon legendary signpost creature. Shout out to Jesper Acing, one of my favorite Magic artists here with Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius. So 2 mana, 2/3, Bearer Druid, legendary. He's a green and a blue. Spells you cast from your graveyard or from exile cost 2 less to cast. That line is not very relevant for limited. Obviously, it's more of a constructed line, but plotting cards from your hand costs 2 less is very relevant. You can look over at this Plan the Heist card. For instance, that's a draw 3. You can plot that for 2 if you have Doc Arlock out, which is an insane rate. Or some of these potentially these huge plot creatures, being able to plot those for much cheaper is very, very powerful. So Doc Arlock is a very powerful signpost uncommon, in addition to just being a 2/3 for 2, which feels pretty good. So the blue-green deck in general is just going to be trying to ramp and cast big spells, plot big spells. And that's kind of just what you're going for with the green-blue deck. It's sort of a simple ramp deck. And then we've got blue-red double spell. So there have been other formats where this was the goal for blue-red. This is what they've been trying to do. But I think this is the format where it's going to be the most easy to actually go in on the theme. And that's because of the plot mechanic. Essentially what the deck is trying to do is pay you off for casting 2 spells in a turn. And we'll start with Slick Sequence, which is the normal signpost uncommon. It's a blue and a red for an instant. Slick Sequence deals 2 damage to any target. If you've cast another spell this turn, draw a card. So basically, if this is your second or later spell, then it's a shock that draws a card for 2 mana, which is crazy. This card could potentially be constructed playable. And what is primarily going to be allowing you to make sure that you cast 2 spells in a turn is, of course, plot. You plot something in an earlier turn, and then you cast it for free, and you can spend all your mana on something that cares about how many things you've cast this turn. So, for example, this Lone Shark, 4 mana, 3/4 Shark Rogue. When it enters the battlefield, if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn, draw a card. So you can plot it early, and then, on a turn, you can cast a spell, and then cast this guy, draw a card, because he's the second spell you've cast. So, fairly simple archetype, but is going to kind of force you to plan your turns out ahead of time to get maximum value out of it. Same with this Irascible Wolverine, 3 mana, 3/2 Wolverine. When it enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of your library until the end of turn. You can play the card, but he's got plot, so you can cast him for free. You still have all that mana up, and you haven't played a land yet. So whatever you get off of him, you're going to be able to make use of. And then we're going to talk about the legendary signpost uncommon for blue-red double spell, and that is Crom Violent Cacophony. And that is a 4 mana 2/3 zombie horror with flying. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Crom Violent Cacophony and draw a card. Now, that is, of course, a lot to ask. A 4 mana 2/3 flying body feels rough, but you got to remember this plot stuff, right? You can plot a spell early, and then on turn 4, you can cast Crom, and then cast your plot spell, and you're guaranteed to get a trigger off of him. Then he's a 3/4 that draws a card, which feels great. So I think this signpost uncommon is quite powerful if you can fit enough just decent cards into your deck that just have plot, so that you can make sure that you are double spelling as often as possible. Because Crom, if he just triggers once on the turn you play him, that's already a decent rate. A 3/4 flyer for 4 that draws a card is nothing to sneeze at. And then the last archetype before we move into what I believe to be the best bombs is red-white mercenaries, or mercenary tokens. So these are the colors that are definitely the best at producing those mercenary tokens. And there are plenty of cards that benefit you for them. And the general vibe of this deck is it's going to be an aggro deck that goes wide, but that's also trying to make sure it has good attacks even on a gummed up board. Because even if your board's just full of mercenary tokens and like cheap little vanilla creatures, you'll always have a good attack because you'll be able to put all your mercenaries into pumping a creature and then swing with it. So with that in mind, the first signpost in common is this: form a posse, X a red and a white for a sorcery, create X mercenary tokens, right? So as a reminder, they're 1/1s that can tap to give target creature you control +1/0 until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So, if you're casting this for 5 mana, you're getting 3 mercenaries, that's fine. Casting this for 6 mana, you're getting 4 mercenaries, that's much better. The flexibility on this card is a lot of what's giving you the power here. Being able to potentially spend a bunch of mana to get a bunch of mercenaries, which basically, if your opponent's not applying pressure, if you're the one in the beatdown, then those mercenaries are going to be, buffing each other up and swing in for a large amount each turn, where your opponent basically has to block and trade with it to at least reduce the amount of pressure that they're under. And then we've already talked about Prickly Pear. Wanted Griffin is a 4-mana 3/2 flyer. When it dies, you get a mercenary. That's decent. But there's just lots of ways in red and white to make these tokens. And then the legendary signpost uncommon is Eartha Joe, Frontier Mentor. So she's a 4-mana 2/4, 2 a red and a white, for a legendary core advisor. When she enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 red mercenary creature token that taps to, the token. And then whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So obviously now all of your mercenaries can buff 2 different creatures or can buff a creature twice, which is very powerful. But also all the abilities that, maybe target your opponent are now live for being copied by Eartha Joe and happening twice. So a lot of those abilities that, commit a crime in some way on your opponent or one of their creatures, because it isn't just copying things that target you or your creatures, it's also your opponents and their creatures. Just the body on this, 4-mana 2/4, and when it comes in you get a mercenary, stellar. Even if it wasn't copying the mercenaries' activated abilities, it'd still be quite powerful. So Eartha Joe is definitely a very good signpost uncommon. I think this deck is relatively easy to play, easy to understand. It's going to be a great deck if you just want kind of an aggro experience to kind of figure the format out. This is a good deck to draft. Next, we're going to talk about what I view to be the best bombs in the set. We're going to talk about the best mythic bombs in the main set, rare bombs in the main set, and then the best bombs off of each of the bonus sheets. So this section's going to be a little bit longer just because than normal, just because there are more rares in the set than normal because of the 2 bonus sheets, one of which is all mythics. So first we're going to talk about what I view to be the best mythic bombs in the main set. And of course, Oko, he's back again, still bare-chested. 4 mana 3 loyalty, legendary planeswalker Oko. At the beginning of combat on your turn, Oko the Ringleader becomes a copy of up to 1 target creature you control until end of turn, except he has hexproof. So that's already crazy, right? You can make Oko a creature. +1, draw 2 cards. If you've committed a crime this turn, discard a card. Otherwise, discard 2 cards, right? So kind of a looting ability. -1, create a 3/3 green elk creature token. -5, for each other non-land permanent you control, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. So I think a lot of the time in Limited, what you're going to be doing with this is minusing it to make 3/3s until it's about to die, and then just looting. And then minusing it to make more 3/3s. Obviously very powerful. If you're on the beatdown, this becomes a copy of another creature, and then the game's basically over. It's crazy. Oko the Ringleader, very powerful card. Gisa the Hellraiser, 3 and double black for 4/4 legendary human warlock. Ward, 2 and pay 2 life. Skeletons and zombies you control get +1/+1 and have menace. Whenever you commit a crime, create 2 tapped 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature tokens. This ability triggers only once each turn. Yeah, if you commit a crime with this out, that's a backbreaking amount of value, coupled with the fact that this has wards, so it's very likely that you're going to get to commit a crime with this out. And then Railway Brawler, 5 mana, 5/5, so 3 and double green, for a Rhino Warrior with Reach and Trample. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is its power. And then this plots for only 3 and a green. So, the obviously powerful thing to do with this is to plot it on turn 4, and then on turn 5, you cast it, and then you cast another creature. That creature comes in with double power, basically, with +1/+1 counters equal to its power. So, Railway Brawler, just an insanely powerful card, right? Just a ton of value, and very little way to answer it unless they have an instant speed removal spell on the turn after you plot it. So very, very powerful card. Next we're going to talk about what I view to be the 3 best bomb rares. And I mean, this set doesn't feel super bomby, honestly. I mean, there are going to be a couple that are very powerful, but not too many, I don't think. So Ornery Tumblewag is a 3 mana 2/2 Brushwag mount. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Whenever Ornery Tumblewag attacks while saddled, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. And of course, he saddles for 2. So obviously, that saddle ability is very nice. But I mean, I'm going to compare this to Luminarch Aspirant from Zendikar Rising or Siege Veteran from Brothers War. Just these cheap creatures that put a +1/+1 counter on something every combat are going to make you just eventually win on board, whether you are on the beatdown or not, just by virtue of the fact that you are repeatedly adding stats to the board at no cost. So, by virtue of that, I think this deserves to be one of the best rares in the set. We're going to talk next about Roxanne Starfall Savant. It's kind of crazy how many of these I've gotten in my practice drafts. And we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the splashability of the set, but I have found myself funneled into Jund very often by like a pack 2 rare. So what Roxanne does, ultimately, she's a 5 mana 4/3 cat druid, legendary. She's 3 a red and a green. Whenever Roxanne enters the battlefield or attacks, create a tapped colorless artifact token named Meteorite with, when Meteorite enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, and tap, add 1 mana of any color. So Meteorite is an old classic, I wouldn't really call it a classic, it's not very good, but it was a card from several core sets that just played the role of a mana rock that shocked something when it came in, right? And then she also has the added text of whenever you tap an artifact token for mana, add 1 mana of any type that artifact token produced. So of course this affects her meteorites that you get when she enters or attacks, but it also doubles the mana from tokens. In the words of Joanna Newsom, the meteorite is the source of the light, and the meteor is just what we see. And the meteoroid is a stone that's devoid of the fire that propelled it to thee. So the ability to, when this comes in, just kill something, it leaves behind a mana rock, very powerful. It's a Titan ability, so it's when it enters or attacks, fairly self-explanatory. Now, I think this next card is better than any of the mythics in the set, maybe. It's definitely the best rare in the set. Crazy, crazy value. So, Bonnie Paul Clearcutter. 3 a green and double blue, so 6 mana for a 6/5 legendary giant scout with reach. When Bonnie Paul Clearcutter enters the battlefield, create Bow, a legendary blue ox creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever you attack, draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. They're really back on their Simic bullshit. If you're casting this with 6 lands, which most of the time you're going to be, you're getting 6/5 reach and a 6/6. And whenever you attack, not with this, just whenever you attack, and that includes with a creature you already had out, you're going to draw a card and put a land from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. This card's absurd. This card is going to be very frustrating to play against in Limited just because of the sheer power of it. It's a true test of how good can we make a 6-drop and maybe still have it not see any play in constructed. And maybe, we'll see. This card's very good. Pack one, pick one. You're going to feel great about taking this. If you're already in blue, you're going to feel great about pivoting to green as well to play this. This card's just insane. And then next we're going to talk about the best bombs on the crimes bonus sheet. And these are, in my opinion, what they are. We've got Fractured Identity. Now this debuted in a Commander deck. And I believe it was in some other limited format. It was Commander Masters, or it was on some. It was in some other limited context, but it hasn't really seen much play. There's seen much of the ability to play it in limited. But it was in I believe the Magic Online Vintage Cube, or maybe it was some other Magic Online Cube. It's a Cube All-Star. But Fractured Identity, for those who don't know, 3 a white and a blue for a sorcery. Exile target non-land permanent. Each player other than its controller creates a token that's a copy of it. So, of course, in a limited context, you're going to be exiling your opponent's best thing, and you're going to be getting a token copy of it. It's basically a 5-mana take control spell, except you're also going to get enters the battlefield triggers. This card's insane. Not much to it. And then we've got Outlaws Merriment. This card is so fun. I love this card. I played a standard deck that was kind of a grindier red-white control deck where this was the win con. But it's 1 a red and double white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one at random. Create a red and white creature token with those characteristics. A 3/1 human warrior with trample and haste. A 2/1 human cleric with lifelink and haste. A 1/2 human rogue with haste, and when this creature enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. So we're really stretching the definition of crimes to put this on the bonus sheet, because this has a 1 in 3 chance of committing a crime on your upkeep if it chooses that last option at random. But this card's very fun to play. Very powerful, obviously. If they don't answer it, you're just going to keep getting little creatures. And they're not that dinky of creatures. It's 1/2s that ping something, 2/1s, and 3/1s. So those do eventually win the game. And then we've got Mindslaver, classic Magic card. Fun fact: this is a mythic on the bonus sheet, but so it's it's not gonna show up very often. But if you get this, there's a mythic on the big score sheet that can actually lock your opponent out of the rest of the game. For those who don't know what Mindslaver does, it's a 6-mana legendary artifact. You can pay 4, tap, sacrifice Mindslaver. You control target player during that player's next turn. So what you're obviously going to do is you're going to use their removal spells on their own creatures, swing their crappy little creatures into your big ones to get them eaten, just make the worst possible decisions for them on their turn. Mindslaver is a very powerful card. It's a little less powerful and limited than constructed, but it's still very, very powerful. And I think it's going to be very good. It's similar to taking an extra turn. But yeah, there's a big score mythic artifact that whenever you sacrifice an artifact, you can pay 2 to get a copy of that artifact on your next end step. So you can go infinite with Mindslaver and take all of your opponent's turns for them in limited. Is that likely to happen? No. Is somebody going to post about it on Reddit when it happens to them? Yeah, obviously. So just a fun little thing. But Mindslaver is obviously a very powerful bomb in its own, regardless of that context. And then we've got the best bombs from the big score sheet. Vaultborn Tyrant is probably the card from the set that I'm the least excited to play against. It's 5 and double green for a 6/6 dinosaur with trample. Thankfully, I'm not going to have to play against this particular card very often at all. Whenever a Vaultborn Tyrant or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Okay, alright. When Vaultborn Tyrant dies, if it's not a token, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So this, powerful value engine that's drawing cards, gaining life off of itself, and then potentially other things. When it dies, you just get another one. This card's obviously very powerful. Pack 1, pick 1, you're going to feel great about this. You're going to pivot into green for this. Just a good card. Then we got Lost Jitte, which is a play on Umezawa's Jitte. It's a single mana for a legendary equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, put a charge counter on Lost Jitte. Worth noting that that's just combat damage, not necessarily to a player. Remove a charge counter from Lost Jitte. Choose one. Untap target land. Target creature can't block this turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. And then this equips for 1. So very powerful card. The more... you can put this on a creature very cheap, and then it does combat, whether it gets blocked or not, you're putting a counter on it, and then you can potentially, you save up enough counters, you can stop your opponent's stuff from blocking and do a big alpha strike. You can untap lands to make big plays. Just a very versatile card. Obviously it doesn't have the properties of Umezawa's Jitte of being able to, like, neg 1 your opponent's creatures, or buff your creatures +2/+2 for the turn, right? It's obviously not Umezawa's Jitte, but a card does not need to be Umezawa's Jitte to be very powerful, and I think this one is quite strong. And then we've got Collector's Cage. 1 and a white for an artifact. Hideaway 5. So when it comes in, you look at the top 5, you exile one of them face down. You can pay 1 and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So the hideaway thing is very nice, because it's not going to be very difficult to trigger this when every turn you're paying 1 tapping and putting a counter on target creature. It's going to be relatively easy to assemble that coven. And yeah, I mean, even once you've already cast the thing, you can continue to just put counters on your creatures every turn. Very, very powerful card. Going to be very happy to have these in any draft deck. So last but not least, I'm going to go over some tips and tricks for the format based on the playtesting, or not playtesting, but practice drafts that I've done over on Draft Sim. Based on the way that I think the format is actually going to shake out in Draft and Sealed. First of all, we're going to talk about easy splashing, and I kind of already got into this in terms of, I really think this format is going to be very similar to March of the Machine, if you remember that format, where, it has a lot of things in common with it. The common dual lands that come in tapped, in this case in the form of the deserts, as well as the 2 signpost uncommons in each color pair, sort of beckoning you to splash a third color to maybe have access to 1 or 2 of them. As well, there's a lot of, like, 2-color and 3-color rares, although the 3-color rares usually aren't. We'll get into that shortly. But I think it'll be very easy to splash in this format, even in non-green decks, but especially in green decks. I know I played a lot of March of the Machine, and in that format, a lot of times it was correct to go Jund or Sultai or Abzan, especially, where you'd have these, like, base green decks, Teamer as well, just like these base green decks that are very happy to go into a third color for a decent rare, or even a powerful signpost uncommon in pack 2 or 3, and it was just very easy to find that fixing to make it happen. I think this set will play out much the same, especially with green decks, although, of course, in the aforementioned format, I did have my fair share of Esper decks, right? Any deck that's capable of going to the late game is going to be able to make a splash with little to no cost to its card quality. So easy splashing, and then we're going to talk about these 3-color legends. There are a lot of rare and mythic 3-color legends that have the vibe of, like, they were designed to appear in a Commander Precon that got scrapped later. Because a lot of these cards, to be honest, just don't really have anything to do with the limited format. This Ariette the Beguiler that looks weirdly like Britta from Community cares about enchanting your opponent's creatures with auras, which is just not something that you do in this set. Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, is a really, like these are sweet cards for, like, I guess a commander deck you could build around them. But, like, they are not cards that do anything with this limited format. So, like, this Obeka, when it hits an opponent, gives you additional upkeep steps. And this Riku of Many Paths, whenever you cast a modal spell, you get some bonus effects from Riku. You can exile cards, you can put counters on Riku and give it trample, you can make flyers. And the only modal spells in this set are the spree cards. And you should, just in case you couldn't tell, you should not be drafting a 3-color, 3-mana 3/3 that only triggers when you cast spree spells in this set. So yeah, there's a lot of these 3-color legends. Most of them are not very good. Don't do anything in this format at the very least. And so you should. These are definitely traps. I would hope that I have given you enough insight into how to play limited that you wouldn't fall for any of these traps. But it should be remarked on that these are largely to be avoided in draft. You should not be trying to make these work. And they are not the reasons why you should be building a 3-color deck. Last thing, or not the last thing, but another thing. The enemy fast lands are in this set, so they round out the set of 10 fast lands being legal and standard because they reprinted the ally fast lands in Phyrexia. All will be one. These are cool. They're probably between $5 and $10 each. It will be where they settle after this reprint. So be aware of that when you're drafting. Although they might end up even cheaper. The ally fast lands ended up a lot cheaper after Phyrexia will be one. But the point being, they're legal and standard now. They're okay and limited if you need fixing, but they're not. It's not like a fetch land where you should take it for the value. And they're just worth noting that they exist in the set. With all that said, thank you all so much for watching. As always, it means a ton to me when you guys check this stuff out, when you give it a like, when you give me a subscribe, when you share it with a friend. I love talking about Limited, and the most important part is that I want you to share your thoughts in the comments. I want you to tell me what you think I got wrong, the decks that you're most excited to play. For me, it's definitely that blue-white not casting spells from your hand this turn that I'm the most excited about. That really intrigues me. Although, I just love a good Jund mid-range. I'm ready to go to Thunder Junction out here. Just kind of splashing a third color really easily is fun. When it's an interesting strategic decision. So hit me in the comments with the decks you're most excited to play. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.